Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Indeed, I've been a water professional, I've just realized, for 35 years. 20 years as a consultant and a researcher, 19 years as a public servant and an elected member of a water board, and those two don't add up, so there's a little overlap there, but 35 years. I'm not an economist, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a politician. I am a biologist who got lost in water and never wanted to turn away from it. I'm also a lawyer, by the way, but that's not consequential, I suppose. Where is the clicker which I can use? Oh, here it is. I was invited, I suppose, to give a sort of a quick overview on the basis of slides of what is going on this topic. And I was intrigued by the subtitle, the Rewriting the Social Contract, on duties and obligations, as was mentioned, but also considerations and maybe underlying principles, and that is what I would like to cover. And water indeed is at risk, and where water is at risk, if it is in Spain or anywhere else on the globe, humanity is at risk. And I would argue, also from my position as chair of the Water Governance Initiative, I'll be talking a bit about that later, that governance is key. Not only technology, not even finance or economy, but all of that together, governance. So the principles and indicators on governance, this is what we at the Water Governance Initiative, and Gonzalo is part of that, and Gary here in the audience is part of that, and maybe some of you I haven't met today. But you're welcome to look at the work that we're doing at OECD with a lot of others. Financing of water obviously is a big challenge. And if time allows, I will give you some Dutch perspective because I'm as Dutch as they come. If that is allowed, I will share that with you. So, pictures about shortages of water, floods, about water quality issues, about sanitation. I'm sure there's no sanitation at all where people are living in such circumstances. And we have to consider that water has already been established as a human right by the United Nations General Assembly. I don't know if they talked about it yesterday in these terms or the day before, but it is a human right. Drinking water, sanitation, and this is on the top of the agenda also in the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular number 9. And it was reiterated and underlined in 2015. Water is a human right. This is when we look into space, and what do we see? We see a blue planet. And it seems, or rather if we look from space to our planet, it is blue. There seems to be ample water. But if we condense that water into a drop, all of the water on the planet, this blue drop, the bigger blue drop, is all the water on the planet. That seems less than it seems if you look at the first picture. But this is also seawater. All the fresh water is this drop. And all the available fresh water is this minute little droplet, a pixel of a droplet. This is the water in streams and rivers and aquifers and lakes that we are dependent on as humanity, as the biosphere. We share this water with plants and animals. As I said, I'm a biologist. So if you look at it from this perspective, it is daunting. And if we do not take care of this precious resource, then sometimes in the future we may end up on some spacecraft. But that's something I don't want to think about. Now, so water is at risk. And every year, I saw a tweet this morning with the latest statistics, the World Economic Forum gathers in Davos. And they issue a global risk report, not only on water, but water and the environment and climate change are always, every year for the last 10 years, in the top 10 risk category in terms of likelihood and impact. Likelihood, the chance something happens, the impact what is the, let's say, the damage in different terms, and they're always up there. So, so extreme weather event, natural disasters, climate change, failure to mitigate and adapt. And those are the likelihoods, the chances, high chance of such events, and impacts. Again, the green diamonds here, and water crisis. Every year we see this reiterated, and this is by captains of industry, this is by world leaders. They fill in the questionnaire, and this is what comes out. So then natural disasters are obviously an economic factor. And so for the insurance community, insurance companies, this is very important to have their data straight because of their policies and their premiums, obviously. And every year I look at this report in January, the Münchner Rückversicherung, the Munich Re, Munich reinsurance company. And so they present this, they published this Topics Geo. So in 2016, it was the year of floods. In 2017, it was the stormy year. So what will this year be? I have a slide later on. And it is projected, it is on the globe, all these different geophysical events, that's earthquakes, meteorological events, storms, and hydrological events, floodings, droughts, climatological events. They're all on the map, and they're not evenly distributed, and not from year to year, and not from country to country. Obviously, we have fatalities, and there is economic loss, and also they are not evenly distributed. So in 2017, most fatalities were in Asia. But the damage was mostly due to the storms in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. So every year this picture changes. There's great volatility and great variance, but the trend is up. The damage, the economic damage, is going up since the 80s. And the red bars is what is insured, but the blue bar is bigger. So a lot of that is not insured. And so, but this damage is there, so it has to be absorbed into local economies, regional and country economies. So this is a real worrying trend. The losses are rising and the volatility is increasing. Excuse me, going forward. Now, what kind of a year was 2018? Well, we've had some storms already in the Americas, but I suppose it's the year of drought. The lower half of the picture shows the heat wave of 2018, this summer, which hasn't ended. And the upper one is 1976 for people in my country at least, but probably also elsewhere in Europe. This was a reference, the year 1976, that drought. But look at the lower picture. It is getting worse and worse. Even in my country, I have never seen this year, city of Eindhoven, pictures like this. Irrigation and drainage canals, 90% of the watercourses ran dry. No water, just groundwater for farmers to use and deplete in some instances. And this sort of savanna in the city of Eindhoven, I've never seen that. So we're in real discussion with farmers, with nature conservation, with the mayors and aldermen of cities what to do about it if next year, which is predicted by some people, it will happen again. So water is high on the agenda, and drought is, the availability of water is an issue. Also recognized by the World Bank back in 2016, this report on climate change, water and the economy. And it is a factor of real economic impact. Predictions of the loss of GDP, gross domestic product, in these countries and elsewhere, I'm sure, but these were included. If we get things right, if we manage it right technically, but also the way we organize it, it may change, and sometimes it will even, maybe in China and other parts, it will turn into an advantage. That can happen. And that's interesting. Can we manage, can we make our disadvantage into an advantage, also economically? So water, I like this quote in that report, is to adaptation, climate adaptation, what energy policy is to mitigation, prevention of further climate change. The challenges are enormous, and smart water policy is fundamental. So, ladies and gentlemen, water is at the focal point. It's not just water management, but it's connected. Water is connected. There's a nexus with food production, with urban development, with energy consumption and production, and the environment as a whole. We shouldn't look at water just from the technical point of view of water management. We should look at it from a holistic, integrated perspective. And so if water is high on the agenda, well, it was mentioned, the United Nations yesterday and the day before, a couple of years ago under the previous Secretary General, a high-level panel on water was established, and they produced this report, Making Every Drop Count. My presentation should become available, and there's a lot of references for you for further reading. I would encourage that, further reading, because you can only cover so much in 25 minutes. So the agenda for water action and making every drop count. So a summary is here. The pressure is rising, action is urgent, availability is at risk and hinders economic progress. Poverty has been mentioned, sustainable development as a whole. And they impose huge social and economic costs. A 40% shortfall in water availability by 2030 is predicted. 40%, 2030. 2030, ladies and gentlemen, is around the corner. It's so close. And the consequences will be disproportionately felt by an increasing a global population, and poverty is an issue. The finance of our actions, what about it? What are the estimates? Well, you get staggering numbers, staggering figures. 6.7 trillion, that's 6.7 thousand billion by 2030, and 3 times as much in the coming decades. And not only to invest in new infrastructure, but also to maintain the existing infrastructure. And failure to do so will impound on our economies and societies. So this nexus between water and economy is also on the agenda of the OECD, which I represent today, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This gentleman waving that report is the Secretary General, Angel Gurria. He's a leader, and he established the notion that water governance is key. Now, what is governance? I could give a lecture of an hour about governance in itself, but it is about, let's say, the technical aspects, the finance, the capacity, the legal aspects, all of that, but also data availability, integrity, transparency. That taken together is who does what, at which level, why, and how. That's the short definition that we like to use. And we presented at the World Water Forum in Korea, in Daegu, in 2015, a report on the principles of water governance. And again, I encourage you to read it. It's available in 18 countries. So if you go out there somewhere in the world, I'm sure that there is a report on this in that particular language, including in Spanish, obviously. I was, as president, had the honor to present this to the Secretary General. And we went from Korea. Every 3 years there's a World Water Forum, and this year it was in Brasilia. Wonderful architecture there, very special, built in the 60s. You should go there, it was my first time. But there we presented yet another report on the implementation of the principles, because principles, talk about principles is fine, but how to make it operational. So we went from principles to indicators, deliverables, things you can measure. And so yet another report. The OECD is very good at, they produce one report every year, every day, so I'm told. And it's all data driven, which I think is excellent. No fact-free politics here. This report on the implementation of the principles, and I'm very much in favor of using this indicator framework which was developed and is in the report. It's a kind of a traffic light system, and you look at the different aspects of the principles which cover effective water management, efficient, which is different, effectiveness, efficiency, and also about the transparency, integrity aspects. We have developed these principles, and then 36 indicators. There's a checklist and data underlying, and you can use this, and it is a means to an end. It's not like a game that you play, it's serious business, but it's a means to an end, in encouraging self-assessment in any city, basin, region, or country. It is voluntary. It's a voluntary exercise which you can do by getting around the table, all the stakeholders involved, and to have a dialogue. I think having a dialogue is so important if you want to start a discussion about any transition, ecological transitions or other transitions. So no reporting or monitoring on the part of the OECD, no compulsory data provision, and no ranking or benchmarking. It is available for people to use. So is water, is it fit for finance? This was a question asked by the OECD again, together with the World Water Council, which organizes these fora every 3 years. It was concluded that from different sectors, irrigation connected to food production, domestic use, livestock manufacturing, electricity, the trend is going up and will go up. It was concluded that the cost estimates, I just gave you some figures, 6.7 trillion and 3 times as much in 2050. This was a little bit earlier. And there's great variance. The large bar is the OECD estimate, which includes the cost from operation and maintenance. And the other estimates did not, only the capital investments. So if you don't look at the operational costs and the maintenance, then you lose out the bigger picture, and also the coverage of that cost is an issue, obviously. If you look at with a bird's eye overview, there's water infrastructure is often a multi-purpose infrastructure connected to the nexus with urban development, energy, etc., agriculture. And the practices vary. Let's talk about, is it public or private, or is it a mix? And how is the cost recovery? Well, in the report, there's a whole range from full cost recovery, which is the basis in France and the Netherlands, to if nobody else take care, you have to do it yourself, self-finance, and everything in between, every mix. So it's really sort of eclectic. Every country or region has their own system. But if you look at it from a methodological point of view, the OECD points out that there are 3 main cash flows. Tariffs, a bill you pay, taxes collected by national government or local governments, and then handed out or issued in the form of subsidies, if you will, and transfers from aid from one country to another, or even philanthropy. They cover the repayable sources, loans, bonds, and equity, underlying the whole financing of this multi-purpose infrastructure. And again, there's this a model. The OECD is great in sort of drawing up models and schemes, and this is yet another one. More recently, last year, together with the World Water Council and the OECD, and supported by the Netherlands, a roundtable on financing water was established. Now, I suppose, Wiebke, you'll be saying something about that in your part of the conversation. 5 actions were already pointed out at the onset to maximize the value of the existing infrastructure and investments. Pathways selected to maximize the water security and the security return over time. Look at synergies and complementarities, and scale up the finance through improved risk-return frameworks. It seems that there is not a sort of an established notion on what the risk-return framework is and how to cover the risks. Now I have 5 more minutes, so something about the Netherlands is still allowed, I suppose. The lowlands, the Pays-Bas, Países Bajos, if my Spanish is passable. So the Netherlands is, in fact, the drain of Europe. We do have transboundary rivers, large rivers, the Rhine, the Meuse, and some others, which connect us, so I turned it a little bit, to the hinterland, and they flow into the sea. It is a small country, only 250 kilometers, 17 million inhabitants, but 10 out of the 17 million live in flood-prone areas. The dark blue is below sea level. Actually, 1,000 years ago, it was above sea level. Because of very efficient irrigation and drainage, we pumped our way down, down, down. Subsidence because of water management. But now we're below sea level. Large parts, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, the capital, they're all below sea level. And the blue is prone to flooding from rivers and the sea occasionally. So we have all this infrastructure, all these dikes that have to be maintained. And for that we have a rather unique system of water boards, and I happen to be the chair of one of those water boards, established 800 years ago with their own finance. We collect taxes locally, regionally, with our own parliament, in which stakeholder democracy, farmers, conservation area, nature conservation areas, businesses, and all of the inhabitants have their elected seats. I was member of such a parliament, and now I'm chair, appointed chair of such a parliament. So that's water democracy in a way. Having said that, we are proud of our heritage. We are proud of the way we manage living below sea level. But still, we approached the OECD in 2013 to have their view, sort of independent view from outside, on how we fit for the future. How is our governance? Is it fit? And then a very big volume of paper was produced. They went around, had dialogues, rather than an audit kind of approach, a dialogue. And one quote we liked, obviously, that the Netherlands is acknowledged as a global reference for water management. Then the regional water authorities and the national, there's also an agency, have played a critical role in keeping our feet dry, and economically it comes at a cost. 1.26% of GDP, which is a lot of money, approximately 750 million euros, which is 1% of our GDP. So it's a lot of money, but it's also kind of an insurance policy against flooding and other issues, I would argue. Now, who pays for this? Interest, I point out the low line, the lowest line there. Decentralized budget is the core. So the water boards, they collect taxes. The drinking water companies, who are owned, by the way, by municipalities, so they're publicly owned private companies. We have 10 in the Netherlands. They collect through tariffs. Provinces, municipalities, sewage by the municipalities, they have their own taxes. That's 85%. So in a country which would flood, if we didn't have this infrastructure, 85% is left to the regional authorities to take care of and to invest in. I think this is an interesting concept which has evolved over time in the Netherlands. Obviously, if you live somewhere, you have to pay. The average price for this, transfers, tariffs, and taxes, for an average household is in the order of 800 euros, which to some families is a lot of money. 800 euros, but then you live in the Netherlands. It comes at a price. We also have, and I think this is interesting, might be also interesting for other countries, or in Spain, I don't know. We have a promotional bank, which is dedicated to financing public infrastructure, not only water. It's called the Water Bank. The shareholders are the water boards, 83%. And it is a promotional bank with guarantees, sovereign guarantees from the state and the water boards. And that because they are AAA, they get cheap money, which they redistribute for all of these investments. Also in housing, I think there's a next slide, yeah. So housing, that's the biggest client, 64% of lending. Water authorities, 11, and others. It's a solid bank, I can assure you, because I am on the supervisory board. And interesting trend, green bonds, social bonds, they are so popular that if they open them up, if there's an issue, 2 hours later, 3 times over the amount from the international financial market. The balance total is 87 billion euros, and they have 54 staff. 54 staff covering all of this, which I think is the most efficient bank in the world. A totally different topic, international aid from the Netherlands. We have very recently established 2 lines for this. The Waterworks for the Drinking Water Corporation in developing countries, and should be interested perhaps also to establish some cooperation across countries in Europe in doing this, and also other aspects, irrigation, drainage, flood control, and you have the figures of the available funds there below. I will skip this because of the time, and thank you very much for your attention.